Hello, my dear fellow seekers of Zen and occasional mess. Welcome to this new episode of the Raw Yogi podcast, where we explore life's highs and lows through yoga wisdom and spiritual insights before we stretch our way to conclusions. It's been a while, but I'm back, and honestly, I think God has a sense of humor because every time I pick a topic, I end up leaving it in all possible ways. And the past couple of weeks, I have been swimming in unwanted repeated patterns. Yep, I'm practically doing laps at this point. So I have learned to just sit back, watch the chaos, and try to navigate with some grace. And of course, there is always an eye roll or two because seriously, how else do we process it all? So today is all about unwanted repeated patterns. And we have all been there thinking we have leveled up in life only to trip over the same situation in a different outfit. It's very disturbing. But stick around because once you crack the code, these annoying patterns can start to look like blessings, or at least like that challenging yoga pose that hurts at first but feels great afterward. So to break this down, I have got two guiding lights with me on this journey. First, yoga. It has been my go-to practice for staying grounded and self-aware, so I don't just fall headfirst into my own dark holes. Although, let's be real, most of the times, I totally trip and fall in super hard. But it reminds me to still laugh at myself because, self-awareness without humor, it's just too heavy and painful. Second, my background as a Muslim. And can I just say here how excited I get every time I find an answer within my faith. Because, sometimes I will be sitting there thinking, wait, I have heard this before, only to realize it has been there all along. I just resisted or misunderstood it in the past. And it's like unlocking a new level in the game of life, which is mind-blowing for me. So through these episodes, I hope to inspire you to explore your own faith too, to remove all these doubts and resistance that come from just not knowing. And hey, if I ever say something off or make a mistake explaining my own understanding, I hope you will forgive me because that's all on me, not Islam and definitely not God. I'm a work in progress after all, and we are all here figuring it out as we go, repeating the same patterns until we finally don't, hopefully. All right, now that I have set the stage, go make yourself a cup of tea, grab your coziest blanket, and find that sweet spot on your couch. Put on your headphones and let's get into this mindful mess together. Okay, my dear friends, stay with me here because first we are going to break down the idea of unwanted repeated patterns. And if you are not familiar with it, picture this: those annoying cycles that just won't quit. Maybe you always end up in the same kind of relationship dynamics, whether it's with friends or lovers. You keep finding yourself in identical situations, wondering, how did I end up here again? Or you experience the same old reactions from people, feeling abandoned, betrayed, disrespected, and you are left thinking, really, why does this keep happening to me? Most of us start by playing the victim card. We say things like, I did everything right, I gave my best, and yet they treated me badly, they left me. Yes, you have said it, I have said it, we have all said it at least once. But here is the deal. As long as we stay in that mindset, these patterns will keep dancing their way back into our lives for years until we reach that enough is enough moment and we finally decide to face everything head on. And let me tell you, it's the toughest and bravest move you will make because you will have to put aside all distractions and take that long, hard look in the mirror, realizing you have played a part in these cycles too. And if you have hit that point, congrats, my friends, you have just entered the radical shift zone. So now, what's next? Maybe therapy, coaching, or maybe a Bali retreat where all these new gurus will promise to align your chakras in 7 days. Okay, let's slow down a bit. Before booking flights to find your spiritual alignment, we have got to unpack this step by step. So, from what I have noticed, therapy tends to be the first stop for most people on their healing journey. It's kind of like mental shavasana, except instead of relaxing, we are digging up all those childhood traumas. And what's the usual conclusion? It's all our parents' fault. And psychology is really into this. Have you ever heard of John Bowlby? He was a British psychiatrist who developed what we call attachment theory, which basically says that our relationship with our parents as kids shapes how we act as adults, which makes sense. And Dr. Ramani, another expert I follow, explains that these attachment behavior also play a huge role in those messy, toxic relationship dynamics we have. When you get too clingy, needy, or possessive in love, turns out that's trauma response. Now, most people think of trauma is something, it needs to be something extreme, like abuse or some big incidents, but that's not always the truth. As kids, our imaginations run wild and we turn ordinary experiences into these epic stories that become our personal truths. And just the other day, I saw a perfect example of this. I was watching a guy teaching a kid how to surf. And the kid, I think he was 6 or 7 years old. That day, the tide was low and waves were very small. So when a wave came, the teacher gave that kid a little push just to help him stand, but he couldn't, so he fell into the water and came up all crying and shaking. Then he started telling his parents what happened to him, so he told them the wave was so big, it pulled him under the water so deep he couldn't even breathe. But from where I was standing, his head barely dipped under the surface of the water, and it took him like 1 second to stand up. But I believe to him it was a terrifying experience, and that's probably the story he will remember forever. It's fascinating, right? And that's how it works for all of us. As kids, we turn small moments into lifetime drama. All right, I think we have held this pose long enough. Let's keep flowing. Before we get to the juicy part, we do first a quick dive into psychology and talk about these insecure attachment styles John Bowlby introduced. And as I go through them, see if any of these resonates with you. Okay, here we go. The first attachment style, it's called anxious attachment behavior. This happens at an early age when, as kids, we experience separation or abandonment. Maybe your parents were always off doing their things, leaving you with someone else, and now, boom, welcome to adulthood with a side of insecurity. In relationships, this shows up as needing constant reassurance and being absolutely terrified of being left behind. You might find yourself doing a little detective work on your partner's phone, or maybe sending them a million of texts just to make sure they haven't ghosted you. Or perhaps you go overboard in the name of love because deep down, you don't feel like you are enough. That, my friend, is anxious attachment in action. And the wild part, the more you fear being left, the more it's going to happen. So namaste to that never-ending cycle. The second attachment style, it's called avoidant attachment behavior. When you were a kid, your emotions might have been ignored or your parents didn't know how to support you emotionally. Because, from 0 to 5 to 7 years old, I would say, as kids, we are learning to deal with emotions and we look for help and support, but sometimes, our parents just didn't get it. So now, as an adult, you learn to rely on yourself. You keep people at distance, you value independence, and relationships feel like a little suffocating because, you will have to talk emotions, and obviously that's not your thing. So if that sounds like you are probably the person escaping those group hugs after yoga class. And finally, the last unhealthy attachment style. It's called disorganized attachment behavior. Okay, I am very familiar with this one as it's an old friend. This is a mix of both anxious and avoidant. Basically, it's emotional chaos. 1 minute, everything is peaceful, and the next, it's a huge storm. And if you have been growing up in an unpredictable environment, it's like showing up to yoga class, not knowing if it's gentle flow or power vinyasa. Basically, it creates inconsistency in adulthood. So as an adult, you crave intimacy, but you are so scared of it. You start things with excitement, but run away when it gets too real. It's really hard for you to enjoy the light because you are always expecting darkness. So, did any of those attachment styles sound familiar to you? All right, now that we have got the basics down, let's dive into the real talk. So, one thing to keep in mind here, all these attachment styles are not who you are. They are just tools to understand yourself better. Now, here is where things can get tricky. Psychology has only associated these attachment styles to family dynamics and made us think this must be the root of all our problems. And what happens next? We end up in endless therapy sessions or we dive deep into spiritual healing practices, hoping that fixing relationships with our parents or ancestors will fix everything. Been there, done that, and trust me, you can get stuck in that loop forever. Now, don't get me wrong, therapy has taught me so many things, and to be honest, there are times where seeking help is absolutely necessary. Also, these healing modalities have really opened my eyes to mind-blowing layers we carry within ourselves. But if I am being honest, I have always felt something was missing here. And let me share something personal. Few times back, I went through a tough cycle, did some deep meditations, and end up with a long list of childhood traumas. And of course, I turned to therapy because, I needed to understand a couple of things. But at some point, I realized I don't want to commit to such a never-ending loop. And around that time, I had a heart-to-heart conversation with a friend. I opened up to her and said, look, I have all these childhood traumas bubbling up to the surface out of nowhere, and I don't know what to do with this. I mean, I have a list of people to blame, but what to do from here? So, of course, she asked me if I have tried shadow work or family constellation, and I did, but it just didn't align with my deeper purpose. But then she shared something really unexpected. She was telling me about her own experience and how she dealt with her anger toward her mom. And simply, she just called her mom and unleashed all this anger, and somehow it made her feel better. But this made me think, I'm coming from a Muslim background, and yelling at your parents, it's a big no-no. It's forbidden in our faith, and I couldn't even picture myself doing something like that. But at the same time, I was carrying this deep, strong anger about my family dynamic. Honestly, I had no idea how to process it. And I even remember I was sitting in the car with my dad and I told him, look, I have so much anger inside, I don't know what to do with it. So he, bless his heart, he said, do you want me to take you somewhere so you can scream? He was so sweet and I'm lucky to have him. But I told him, look, Dad, this anger is so big. It's bigger than just screaming. And that's exactly how I felt. So I decided I will look for answers in my own faith. And here is where things can get a little bit confusing. While all these healing practices were pointing me towards family dynamic and healing relationships with the parents, my religion was telling me not to blame them at all. And let's be real, a lot of childhood traumas show up in people's behavior because of those dynamics. So it was a weird contradiction for me. And I sat with this confusion for months until just a couple of weeks ago. I was talking to my sister and we talked about all this anger phase we both went through. And she said something that blew my mind. She asked me a very simple question. She said, Inti, do you know who you were really angry at? And let me tell you, that question unlocked a missing piece of the puzzle. You know, John Bowlby, that attachment theory guy, he said something really interesting. He said that we are born with an attachment behavioral system, meaning our attachment or our relationship to our parents, it's not even the first layer. There is another attachment dynamic before that one. Then I came across a paper by two Islamic scholars in the US. They talked about how we create an image of God inside of us based on how our caregivers introduced us to Him, how they talk about God, how they connect to Him, and how they behave in His name. And let's be honest here, many parents fail to realize that they influence their children's emotional experience with God through their parenting practices. And then it hit me. What if I take away my family dynamic from this attachment equation and put God instead? Like, what if my attachment style isn't about my family or my childhood, but it's actually a reflection of my relationship with God? And all these repeated cycles and patterns in my life, they might just be mirrors of that relationship. Maybe that's the only pattern that needs healing. So stick with me here. Let's revisit these attachment styles John Bowlby was talking about through this new lens and see what changes. So if you are anxiously attached, you are probably thinking really high of God, but really poorly of yourself. Maybe deep down, you believed you are not worthy of His love. Not your parents, not your lovers, not your friends, but God. And the job here is to simply strip away those stories you have been telling yourself and explore what divine love feels like. And if you are an avoidant person, maybe you're not even seeking closeness with God because in your mind, you have created an image of God who doesn't get it. And if you cannot be vulnerable with Him, well, it's no surprise you struggle to be vulnerable with anyone else. And if you are a disorganized attachment person, maybe you have seen both sides of God, the light and the dark. And it freaks you out. You want to choose the light, but you are constantly scared for that darker side to pop up. But unless you embrace both, you will keep seeing the chaos mirrored in everything around you. I don't know what you think about that, but when I started viewing those so-called unwanted repeated patterns as a reflection of my relationship with God, everything shifted. I realized I didn't actually know my Creator. I only knew Him, and I knew a version of Him through my parents, and they only knew the version their parents passed down. But here is the thing, that's not enough. Let me drop something here to think about. The devil has got zero interest in seeing this relationship with God heal. In fact, he is constantly throwing distractions our way, and one of them is making us blame our parents, ancestors, and our entire family tree so we don't turn to God and heal that connection. And the sad truth is, as long as we don't get to know God beyond these whispers messing up in our heads since childhood, we are stuck in these loops. There, I said it. Think about it. So as long as that relationship with the divine is still and clear and misunderstood, our lives reflect that chaos. And it's not about those unwanted repeated patterns because they are all part of the same larger pattern. It's just one relationship to heal and to cultivate, and once you get that one right, everything else will fall into place. So here I am, working on healing the toxic dynamic I have created with God, revisiting the image of Him I have been carrying in my heart. Of course, it's messy, but it's mine to clean. Now it's your turn. Think about the patterns in your life. Are they really unwanted? Or they are there nudging you to heal the most important relationship? Maybe it's time to reintroduce yourself to God and shake off all these old stories and start fresh. So, my friends, that's all for today's episode. Remember, we are all here trying to figure this life out, and maybe, just maybe, sharing our insights will become a little survival guide for someone else along the way. Until next time, embrace those patterns, love them like your favorite yoga pants. Because let's be real, it's just God's way of reminding you to turn back to Him. So stay grounded, stay playful, and I will catch you in the next episode.